the two of you take over with broadcasting the results and talking about the poll. Welcome to today's webinar on AIM and Universal Design for Learning to Improve Post-Secondary Learner Outcomes. The AIM Center is providing this particular webinar specifically for post-secondary stakeholders for whom we are supplying technical assistance and resources in the area of improving accessibility to accessible educational materials and accessible digital materials and accessible technologies. So welcome, and I'm going to hand it over to Sam and Lynn to introduce themselves and to deliver today's webinar.
Thanks so much, Cynthia. So this is Lynn McCormack. I'm here on AdCast. I work on the AIM Center, and today I'm going to primarily be giving you more information on the technical side. I'm a senior technologist on the AIM Center as well as a software developer here within the CAST organization. So I work on a variety of projects, but I'm thrilled to be here today discussing this topic. And Sam?
Hi, I'm Sam Johnston. I'm a research scientist here at CAST, and I'm also part of the AIM Center and do a lot of applied research and design research into issues of sort of making education more inclusive, in particular adult education, higher education, and I'm looking forward to sharing a little bit about some of the resources we have to help with that important goal.
Great. And so also on the line, albeit very quiet, is Leslie O'Callaghan. She is our operations coordinator here for the AIM Center. She'll be supplying a lot of information into the chat window. So Leslie, if you could, in case people haven't had a chance to download, if you could either put in the link to the presentation or the resources. So today our presentation is available in a Google Docs download, as well as there's a full resource file that goes along as well. So you have access to that, and if we gather some more information or find more information, we will update that resource document, because it could be today that some of you have some information and feedback to us that we could share with you as well. So let's just start just the overview of what we're going to cover today. We're going to be giving you a little bit of background about the AIM Center, talking a little bit about policies and systems and some legal requirements. We'll be giving you an overview of UDL and then going into reviewing some of the resources that are available on UDL on campus, which is specifically for higher ed. If you have any questions at any point in time, Leslie and Cynthia are taking a look at the chat window, so please go ahead and ask those questions. If you have some resources you want to share with us, please feel free to share those resources as well in that chat window. Okay, so let me give you a little bit of background about the AIM Center, and we are sponsored by the Department of Ed, and what our main goal is to build the capacity of states and districts, post-secondary institutions, families, publishers, workforce development agencies, and other stakeholders to increase the availability and use of high-quality accessible materials, or AIM, and technologies that support improved learning opportunities and outcomes for learners with disabilities. And on this page, I have an image of the homepage of the AIM Center website, and I'm going to have Leslie put that into the chat window so you can take a look at that site. So what do we mean by AIM? AIM means accessible educational materials, so we use that acronym, but what we're talking about is that AIM are any of the materials that are either designed or enhanced in a way that makes them usable by the widest possible range of student variability, regardless of whatever format it was born in, and hopefully it's born accessible. So it doesn't matter what that format is. It could be print, it could be digital, it could be graphical, audio, it could be an app that sits on somebody's phone or a tablet, it could be a website, or a simulation which really blurs the line between content and using something and experiencing, actually being in experiencing something, say for example, a interactive lab or something like that. And if you want some more information about what we mean by AIM, recently we've reworked that, and you can take a look at the AIM Basics page on the AIM website. So what we really want to do is not retrofit AIM. What we really want to do is for you all to be thinking about acquiring accessible materials right from the beginning. So rather than getting something in, having your students use it and say, this doesn't work for me, we want you to really be thinking about purchasing or procuring those accessible learning materials. So whether it be from whether you're paying for it or whether you're getting an OER, we want you to be thinking about that. And on the AIM website, there is what we call the POM initiative. It's really tips and processes and sample contract language for you to be thinking about purchasing your materials that are accessible right from the start. So as you think about buying your materials, you want to start asking some questions of your vendors. You don't want to just ask them, is it accessible? Well, if they look at you sideways, you'll know right away probably what the answer to that is. But if you're asking the right questions, you're going to be asking things like, can my users perform all their functions if they can't use a mouse? Has your product been tested using assistive technologies? Can a user who's not sighted get to all of the features and functions that are in here? So right up front, you want to start asking some of those questions, and ask them if they have documentation. Is there documentation available about the accessibility of this product that I'm buying or this content that I'm buying? And those are going to start to give you a really good sense as to whether or not that product is accessible. One of the things you can also look for is, does that product come with a VPAT, which is Volunteer Product Accessibility Template? Now, right in the title it says volunteer, so it doesn't mean that you'll necessarily find that. What you might find instead of that is some sort of accessibility statement or policy. But the VPAT is standard across all of the vendors. If you ask for a VPAT, they should be able to provide you with one. If they've heard of it, that's a good start, and if they have one, that's even better. Don't assume that if they have one that it means that they're also accessible. Definitely make sure that you work with the technical folks that would be able to evaluate that VPAT. The VPAT was created as part of the 508 initiative, and it's used to assist both vendors and consumers in identifying the ways in which the hardware and software products conform to 508 accessibility standards.
And I'll just add one thing I think is, we've got sort of a range in our audience here, but that's important to sort of think about as you're listening here. You may not be the person in your institution directly responsible for purchasing or procurement, but it's a good time as you're thinking about an investment in accessible educational materials and really trying to kind of reach all learners, that you take the time to find out who should be able to answer these questions if it's not you directly. And then also sometimes if you're thinking about resources, say you're an instructor and you're thinking about resources you might use, pull into your class, it's worth also thinking about these questions. So it's not just sort of overall technology that runs across the institution. It's sort of things you bring in, more on an ad hoc basis. That's just as important. But also, if you're not in a direct position of thinking about purchasing or procuring accessible learning materials, you're still a voice to make sure that you're connecting with whoever is doing that to make sure that they've got AIM in mind.
Thanks, Sam. So I just want to make sure we're all on equal footing when we, of course, some of you are from outside of the United States, so this is from the Office of Civil Rights here in the U.S. I know some of you are from Canada, some of you are from England. But this functional definition of accessibility, I think, plays through no matter where you are. What we're saying is that a person with disability should be afforded the opportunity to acquire the same information engage in the same interactions, and enjoy the same services as a person without a disability in equally effective and equally integrated manner with substantially equivalent ease of use. So I think that this should really be your goal, whether or not the Office of Civil Rights is applicable in your country or not. I think that this is a universal desire for providing accessibility to all of our students. Okay, so there are some very recent updates to policies and systems. Again, some of this is just U.S.-based. So recently, the Higher Ed added an addendum to the National Ed Tech Plan that was very recent this month, within the last couple of weeks, as well as a very long-awaited.
I can hardly hear it.
Somebody is not muted.
I can't hear it.
I'm not sure if somebody came in through the bridge. Cynthia, did you mute everybody? Okay, I don't hear the echo anymore. I apologize for those technical difficulties. All right, so
I don't believe I did. Can everybody still hear us? Yes, they're all set.
Okay,
Sorry
great. All right, thank you for checking. Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, so we were talking about the Higher Ed Addendum to the National Ed Tech Plan. Really what this did was tied together the need for accessibility as well as UDL, and that is really critical for teaching every student, and we're going to be talking about that in just a few minutes. The 508 refresh happened, and that 508 refresh, the original 508 was published in 2001, and it was the tech standards covering web software, hardware, media, telecom, standalone. But the 508 refresh filled the gaps. So there were some gaps in around the specifications for accessibility, and that filled those gaps, making sure that your AIM is available to the widest range of physical, sensory, and cognitive abilities. And what happened was, and this standard, I believe, is becoming international. So the WCAG 2.0 minimum AA is now kind of the minimum standard for accessibility and your content. And that's the AA is sort of the middle level of the WCAG compliance. There's single A, double A, and AAA is kind of the most accessible, and AA is the absolute minimum. But what we're saying is really you want to aim for this AA. And so the four mantras of WCAG is perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. And when you think about, well, what do all those things mean? There's, oh, great. So if somebody wants to put in some links for the WCAG, that would be awesome. I think Leslie has those as well. So when we think about what does perceivable mean, what we're thinking about is that there's a visual equivalence for any audio components. These are just some examples. And that there's audio equivalence for any visual component. When we think about operable, we think about being able to use just a keyboard, not requiring a mouse, or being able to use touch, and using all of those different input types. We think about timing considerations. So for example, if somebody has challenges with mobility, and it requires them to click within a certain amount of time, are there adjusters for things like that so people are able to use, that are able to interact with the abilities that they have? Understandable, that's talking about the consistency of your interface. That's also talking about how important it is for structuring your documents, your Word sites, your Word documents, your websites, your applications. And then robust. Robust is talking about making sure that whatever you put forth is going to work with assistive technology. And when I really think about that, I think about designing responsively, meaning it works on any sort of device. If they want to work on a tablet, a phone, a large screen, that it works on all those devices, because when you tell a learner you can't use this particular device and that's the device that they're comfortable with, then that's not very accessible. So we think about responsibly designing things and device agnostic. All right, so one particular case was with the settlement recently with the Department of Justice and edX. So some of you might be familiar with this, some of you may not. And this is, if you are not accessible, this is what might happen. This is even more likely now that the 508 refresh is through, because edX definitely did not adhere to the WCAG 2.0 standards. And so this was really interesting in that it was both the content and the platforms that basically had issues. And it wasn't, like I said, it was not part of WCAG 2.0, did not maintain the minimum standard of WCAG 2.0. They did not have content in MathML, which we won't get into today. That's a little bit bigger of a conversation. They're now required to hire accessibility consultant and conduct annual accessibility audits, as well as develop guidance and training for their content providers. Sam, did you have something to add to that?
Yeah, I would just add, I think the edX example is interesting in both, but it sort of addresses the issue of the platform, you know, what the content sits on needing to be accessible, as well as the content itself needing to be accessible. But it also gets at the importance of sort of being proactive and planning early as you sort of engage in online blended learning initiatives, because edX, you know, started at MIT and Harvard as a way to sort of bring out just a few courses that were face-to-face courses and make them freely available to the world. But now there's, you know, hundreds and hundreds of courses in institutions, and the lawsuit came from the American Association of the Deaf saying that the resources were not accessible to people who were deaf. And so edX now has to apply the settlement to everything that it's already created, as well as anything going forward. So I think it's really, you know, it really makes clear the importance of where you can, trying from the beginning to plan for accessibility from the start, because having to retrofit that many resources is really hard. The other thing I'll say, because I'm sure some people are like, well, we already have stuff out there, is if you do have resources that are out there and you are in a situation where you know they're not all accessible, a lot of institutions have also put out a roadmap, a kind of a planning process for how do we prioritize, how do we make sure that, you know, we need to address these accessibility issues, but let's prioritize, you know, what is most essential to do now, what can wait 2 or 3 months, whatever. And they tend to set those priorities around what students, you know, the reach of those products. So just one resource that might be helpful there, and I'll put it in the chat, but California State University system has thought a lot about accessible procurement, and they have a whole section in their kind of procurement guidance documents on impact, questions about impact. So the things they sort of are most careful about addressing accessibility around are the ones that have maximum impact, meaning they're used across the whole institution, like your learning management system. So it's just worth thinking, A, try not to retrofit, but if you're in a situation where you're having to retrofit, think about a strategy for prioritizing how you go about addressing accessibility concerns. And I'll stick that in the chat now.
Great. So out in the window right now is the poll asking you if you could give us a little bit of feedback about accessibility in your institution. So thinking about my institution has taken steps to improve the accessibility of our courses and programs. So if you haven't answered that and you feel comfortable answering that, please go ahead, and it gives us a sense for how you all are doing. And if you have any comments about work that you're doing, or any thoughts you have around your accessibility work, please do share that in the chat window. Great. Okay, it looks like everybody has taken the poll that is looking to take the poll. So I'm going to now broadcast the results. So everybody can take a look. So that's great. So it looks like a large majority of you are already working on this and have this in process. So that is great. Thank you.
Great. Okay. Well,
Is that okay?
yeah.
All right. So we're going to transition here a little bit.
Yeah, and hopefully everyone can hear me well. We're now transferring over to Sam here. So we want to talk about sort of the second half of this equation, and looking first at sort of putting ourselves back and hopefully a lot of new momentum around really student-centered design in higher education. But this is from the director of the Office of Educational Technology, and he says it's impossible to redesign students to fit into a system, but we can redesign a system for students. This can be the difference between success or failure for our students that need the promise of higher education the most. And last week they launched the higher ed supplement to the National Education Technology Plan, and they really made a strong case and recommendations there around a student-centered system of higher education. So thinking not, here's what the institution offers, this is going to be your higher education, but here you are as a student and here's your goals over time, and here's your constraints. Maybe you have family, maybe you need to work while you attend higher education, maybe you have accessibility issues that need to be addressed throughout your educational experience. Maybe you just prefer not to, learn through lectures. All those things we're starting to factor into providing a high-quality higher education. And the National Ed Tech Plan really calls as does the Higher Education Opportunity Act, for accessibility. Accessibility is the law, and it ensures access to information. Accessibility is foundational to universal design for learning, but it doesn't go far enough, because we're not just talking about access to information, we're talking about turning information into usable knowledge. And so we need to think about accessibility as foundational to ensure that everyone can get there, everyone can perceive information, everyone can manipulate information. But we then need to think about this in the context of the process of learning, which is a sustained effort to take information, to take skills that you're being taught, to take experiences that you might have in the classroom with others in the classroom, and turn that into knowledge that's of use to you, in further pursuing education, that's of use to you in work you might pursue. And so that's really where we get into this area of building on this good foundation of accessibility and moving to universal design for learning, which has accessibility as a component, but also goes beyond that. So it's really the universal design for learning framework, which was born at CAS, really is based on sort of three fundamental issues and realities about how human beings learn. And the first is really this issue of engagement. So it's sort of our kind of primal brain, our affective network, our fight or flight network, and it's really about our motivation. And we all know from different circumstances, but it's very true in learning that people are different, have different sort of avenues to motivation. What's appealing to someone, novelty, is very unappealing to someone else who might like something more predictable, might like to know what's coming ahead, and novelty may actually shut their learning down. And so we need to plan for that. We need to kind of plan for different motivational pathways and plans to motivate learners in different ways. And then looking at sort of how we recognize information, how we perceive what's coming at us from the environment. It's very clear, and it's clear in the conversation we've just had about WCAG 2.0, that content needs to be represented in different ways to account for differences. That's what happened with the edX lawsuit. We didn't account for the fact that an individual who was deaf was going to perceive information in a very different format than someone who was not. There's also very sort of subtle differences around perception. Based on your background experiences, you might pay attention to some things and not to others. And then human beings are also strategic in different ways. They're sometimes more or less strategic. Say someone struggles with their executive functioning or their planning or organizing. They may need support around that. But they also strategize in different ways. And so we need to account for that by really thinking about action and expression and having different ways that students can express what they know, can show that they've actually mastered something in the context of learning. So those are sort of the three learning networks that address issues of engagement, issues of the representation of the information, and issues of action and expression. And to sort of play these out more fully, CAST has developed something called the Universal Design for Learning Guidelines that's really based on 800 peer-reviewed articles and is really sort of the source of a lot of our research and software development. So this is an active, living, breathing work, as well as the contributions of many, many other people in the field that aren't kind of housed here. And these guidelines, so there's 9 guidelines and there's associated checkpoints, really allow you to take these ideas of providing multiple means of engagement, of providing multiple means of representation, and providing multiple means of action and expression, and turning those into applied practices that you can apply to curriculum. So for example, in the engagement area, you want to do things like reduce threats and distractions. So if you're giving an assessment and all of the language is pitching way above the head of all your English language learners in your program, and there's no translation for any of the terms, no glossary, no nothing, well, you've actually not reduced threats and distractions to them succeeding at this assessment. You've actually made more threats and distractions that you may actually not find out what they know about supply chain logistics or this particular economic theory. Now, when you're targeting the development of vocabulary, say it was an English language course, you wouldn't necessarily put these glossary terms in. Maybe they were things you would expect students to know, but you would build up scaffolds and supports and low-stake practice before you have a high-stakes kind of assessment, so that students with different capacities to learn these things or different starting points would be able to get to the same point in the end. So UDL is always about lowering barriers to learning, but it's never ever about lowering expectations for success and for kind of high achievement for everyone. And so these principles, the 3 principles, the associated 9 guidelines and checkpoints are ones that we expect people to sort of chip away at. You're not supposed to sort of take these like a pill and all of a sudden you've done UDL, but people chip away at different pieces to try to advance universal design for learning and better design for the variability that exists in any classroom. So, when we talk to higher ed audiences, we always focus on the fact that there's really no point in doing this if it's not tied to the big issue on campus when you think about student learning, which is making sure that students not only can access higher education, but they can persist hopefully to degree attainment, but at the very least persist through to meeting their own goals. So persist through credentials, certificates, courses, degree attainment. And we know a lot already. We actually know a lot about what are the factors that are about the institution, individual student interaction. So not factors like I don't have the financing to attend higher education. That's a big issue, but we don't address that in our work. But what are the issues that are about the institution, individual relationship and the learning design that can be addressed? And we know that, from 30 years of research, that high expectations and student self-expectations are very key to persistence, to students persisting. And that these are really impacted by the belief that faculty, staff, institutional policies, culture, and students themselves have about their own success. So if we set up a system that's designed really just for one type of student, it's very hard to have high expectations if you're someone who doesn't fit, I'm great at taking a 3-hour multiple choice exam because I have great working memory or great recall. It's hard to really have these high expectations and self-expectations that you'll succeed, especially in light of the fact that if that's really not the right way for you to be assessed, you may well then fail those assessments, and that'll lower your expectations. So tied to that is the idea that academic and social support, both academic and social support, are very important to enable students to meet these high expectations. And then really key is this idea of assessment, so primarily formative assessment and feedback on student progress that informs not only how students understand their work as learners and their progress to learn throughout their higher education, but that also informs the institution, individual instructors, the institution on a larger scale. How are we doing in terms of our design of learning to help students learn their goals? Assessments tell us a lot not only about how students perform, but how we perform as people trying to help them learn. And then this idea of sort of interaction engagement in social and academic processes. So that really goes hand in hand with support. When students are well supported, they're engaged, and engagement we know is key to retention. So how does UDL sort of play a role in student persistence? Well, we think that when instruction and assessment, so both the curriculum and the assessments that are used to judge whether students have been successful with that curriculum, are really optimized for all learners, then more students actually receive academic and social support and are engaged, both because when instruction's well designed for all students, they can participate more. They're then viewed by their peers, by other students, as better participants in class, and they're more desirable partners for things like labs or study groups or whatever it might be. And it enhances engagement just by sort of optimizing each individual learner as a good learner. We make the environment overall one that's more welcoming for all, and better interactions with faculty, because faculty see, well, you know, this person didn't get it when I only delivered the content in this particular way, but when I tried this new approach, I could see that the light bulb turned on, and actually I have high expectations for the student now. And so formative assessments and feedback, when they're better designed, they're better understood by all learners, and they're better understood by instructors and institutions as really measuring the gaps in learning as opposed to the gaps in just the format of an assessment. So we don't want to be measuring that a student's not got great recall. We want to be measuring that a student doesn't understand supply chain logistics. And again, this leads to these high expectations and self-expectations being better met by all students. So we're going to stop here just for a poll.
So the poll is going to be asking you about your institution and if you've thought about UDL at all. And so you're going to be able to choose everything that applies. I'm going to move that over right now because we are interested in finding out what you have done for UDL. So my institution is integrating UDL at the institutional level, at the program level, at the course level, not at all. I don't know. So we're kind of curious as to where your institutions are. So we appreciate that feedback. If there's specific resources that you're using in that process or specific resources that you're developing that you'd like to share with this audience, please do add that to the chat window because we'd be delighted to have your feedback. Okay, we'll give you a couple more seconds. It looks like we get a good cross-reference here. A couple more votes. A few more votes coming in. So I'm going to end the poll now and broadcast the results. So you can see where the organization, see if you fit in with where people are. It looks like there's quite a bit of support at the course level. So individuals are thinking about specific courses, some at the program level, and some at the institutional level as well. A few of you aren't there, and I hope that today has informed you to think about UDL a little bit more. Thanks so much for that feedback.
Okay. So one of the things we've done here at CAST with a project we had very generously funded by the Gates Foundation is create resources, a web resource that is specific to higher education institutions, and I think applies to those also doing online and blended. But it's called UDL on Campus, and the goal is to not sort of, provide the UDL guidelines and the science behind UDL and knock you over the head with it and hope you take it home. It's to say, how do we get into the problem issues in institutions of higher education that you all face around inclusion and try to bring some resources to bear on those problems. So we talked earlier about the issues of procurement and accessible education materials. We have a whole section on media and materials and how you go about making different types of media materials both accessible and universally designed. We have stuff around accessibility and policy. Some people don't know, and very understandably don't know what their legal obligations are in terms of making materials accessible, or what a voluntary product accessibility template is and how I might go about filling one out, as well as things around sort of examples of UDL in higher education. What does it look like on the ground? What does it look like? And what things might I bring to the table around course design? So we've designed the site. We hope to sort of continue to update it as we move along. But we've designed it with a lot of feedback from stakeholders in both community and technical colleges and four-year institutions to find out how do we present some opportunities to address the challenges of inclusion in higher education that are palatable and that are useful to people in the higher ed context. So we want to share that website and share with you some of the resources. And Lynn, who's a developer as well on the site, as well as the person who helps create content, knows that this site is also designed with universal design for learning in mind. So it's responsive, meaning whatever device you're on, it sort of adapts to appropriately. It's designed with accessibility and universal design for learning considerations. So we actually think that, it's our first resource at CAS that's just focused specifically on higher ed, but I think it may also be the first sort of responsive, universally designed suite of resources.
It was.
Yeah, it absolutely was.
We learned a lot during that process, and we think that the product is really good. And I think that many of our sites, oftentimes we're a little academic here, but I don't feel that here. Here I feel like this website really is such a practical approach to this. And the examples, and I hope you do go to the site, we're going to show you a little bit more, but the examples are very real examples. We've worked with universities to capture actual information about actual courses and bring you that experience of those educators to you, and hopefully in a way that's very palatable. So why don't we take a look at some of those resources?
So we want to go through those and then jump to more of your questions. So we have a section. So there's basically four sections on the website. So the first is UDL in higher education, and it's got resources on about UDL. We've got some nice videos there, some different resources. What is UDL? Why does it matter for higher ed? Some getting started resources. So hearing from people again, what would you do to get started? What would your first things be? Some UDL examples, so what does it look like on the ground, and a whole page of UDL initiatives. So say you're in Maryland, you want to know who the heck is doing this around Maryland. Go to UDL initiatives and you might find that there's some institutions engaged in this that you could reach out to. So to just look at the UDL examples page there, I'm going to just give you a sense of that. So one of the examples we have in there is from a very large UDL initiative in North Carolina that is across multiple institutions in the state university system, trying to bring UDL as an opportunity to better support students, all students, but students with learning differences, and they have a big investment in addressing course design with universal design for learning. So one of the things they've done, and we profile it through video on the UDL examples, is they've created a bunch of sort of examples from their courses, which we show, but they have something that they've done to bring UDL into their STEM starter courses. So you think of courses like chemistry and physics, that first-year course that has high enrollment and low pass rates, and are often taught in this way that's pretty uniform. And so what the CollegeSTAR initiative did is they had lead tutors. These were students who'd done well in the course the prior year, that faculty had a hand in deciding, yes, this is the tutor I want, and that were willing to be trained as tutors to then support students that were in the course this year. year. So this would be sort of Chem 101, tutors for Chem 101. The tutors were all trained in UDL. They were trained in group tutoring techniques and in learning differences. So this was probably a day, 2 days of training that they took to do this. And then they led group tutoring sessions. So, students in the course could come to their live tutoring sessions once a week. They were held before exams, and they were also held sort of after, regularly throughout the semester. The tutors also used Tegrity Lecture Capture software to record the tutoring sessions and post these to the course Blackboard site, so the learning management website. And the tutors also attended the course themselves and provided faculty with feedback on their teaching based on what they were learning when they were tutoring students and the misconceptions that were coming up there, as well as the UDL lens that they were bringing to watching how the faculty members taught. So that this example is profiled of using tutors as a vehicle for bringing UDL more fully into these often very large lecture-style courses to improve retention rates. And they've gotten very good results. So those who participated in lead tutoring had higher grades in the course than those who did not. These were at least three active tutoring, so it could be either live or the virtual. Lead tutor sections had no students withdraw, so the section of Chem 101 that had lead tutors compared to one that didn't have lead tutors but had 20 withdrawals and another had 10. Lead tutor sections of Chem 101 had no withdrawals, so it's actually Chem 1120. And then higher pass rate, so 95% pass rate, 14.7% higher than the department. So these are big results, that retention is actually increasing in these classes that usually have a pretty big challenge with retention by just having the tutors be really the one sort of pioneer in UDL and then doing some innovative things around how tutoring sessions are shared out with students. So that's an example. We have a whole suite of resources on course design, things like how to set learning goals that are consistent with UDL, how to think about emotion in learning, how do we think about assessment if we think about it from a universal design for learning perspective. One of the resources people like a lot is the UDL Syllabus resource. So all of the resources have a frame like this where there's a what is this resource about at the top, why should I care about this resource, and then what are the UDL connections, sort of what's the connection to each of the three principles that there is. And this resource has a model syllabus in there, a syllabus that has universal design for learning embedded in it for you to look at and think about, hey, I might use these strategies in my syllabus. Hey, this one's not one I would use. And people like this resource a lot sometimes because the syllabus is sort of your roadmap for how you're going to plan your course out, and it's also really your contract with students. So it's what they see about what your course is going to look like at the outset, and it's what you tell them your course is going to be like at the outset. So thinking about designing your syllabus to address universal design for learning then kind of goes over into how you actually design things like your assignments, your syllabus. If your syllabus says we're going to allow you to, respond to this, the content in this unit in these two ways, you're actually really universally designing your course. I'm going to pass back to Lynn here.
Okay, great. So another section of the UDL on Campus website is called Media and Materials Resources. So those of you that are doing work at the course level might be wanting to look at this particular section of the website, and it gives you specific examples around video, audio, image, text, web conferencing, creating accessible OERs, and EPUB creation. So those are sort of the subsections. I'm going to talk a little bit about the video section, but know that this, the things that apply to that apply to the other features as well. So when you look, what I have up here now is a screenshot from the video resource. All of the pages in the media materials section are laid out similarly like this. So on the left-hand side, you have the navigation. It's always going to be consistent. You see the breadcrumb across the top. I'm talking a little bit of WCAG here, I guess. In the right-hand side, so the center is more of the UDL connection, and on the right-hand side of each one of those resources, you're going to see the tie-in with accessibility. So there's going to be very specific features, requirements for that specific piece of media that you're going to need to make sure that it's accessible. That right-hand side is always accessibility at a glance. And then in the center of the page, you're always going to see the what, the why, again, the UDL connection to this specific resource. There's always going to be some examples of that media on this page, as well as you'll see how do I optimize this media item for learning. So not just video, but how do I optimize video for learning? What are the tips, pointers, best practices for media and learning? So just having a video doesn't necessarily make something accessible, and then have a video that's captioned doesn't necessarily make it accessible to all users. So what Sam was, just to refer back to what Sam was talking about earlier, making sure that that video has a purpose, that it is at the right level for those students, that they are able to process that it helps the learning as it relates to the goal of this particular course, to the syllabus. So making sure that all of those connections are made, that's talked about a little bit in Optimized for Media. And then the last thing I want to show you is an example of an accessible, sort of with UDL features, video player. What I'm showing you here is the AEM Center actually has been providing some support for some development work so that we have a great, accessible, and with UDL tips and pointers in it, framework for developers. So this isn't something a teacher is going to go out to use, but those of you that are in instructional development, you might be able to work with a technologist to grab this piece of code and use it. And what it is, it's a fully accessible video player. It has the full caption support. It has interactive, highlighted, searchable transcripts. So oftentimes you have a transcript that's in a PDF or a Word document or something that's attached. When it's like that, if it's on a website, it's not searchable by the students if they want to go back and find that resource. This is open source and it's available in figuration.org. So if you have questions about this, please feel free to
That audio description support.
Yeah, so the player itself is fully HTML5 compliant, and it would have support for audio in it as well. So this is something recent that we have delivered, and we're thinking about potentially offering a webinar on this. So when we do ask you, as we close out the session, if you're interested in something a little bit more technical, it'd be great if you could give us some feedback on that, because we'd be happy to go into this a little bit more. But definitely want you to be thinking about how do I provide not just the bare minimum for accessibility, but how do I make sure that this resource really provides the best learning experience for my students. All right, so where were we? Oh, I'm so quiet. Wow, we made it. With 10 minutes to spare. That's so awesome. So there are a few questions, I think, as we went along. But are there other questions now? Take a moment to think back on what we've covered today. We covered a lot of ground. We covered accessible materials. We've covered UDL. We've covered UDL on campus as well as the AEM Center. Are there questions or comments at this point in time?
And also, if you don't have them, right on hand, there's a way of reaching us at UDL on campus and the AEM Center. There's an email attached to each of those sites that you can also put questions, like with UDL on campus. I know I want to put resources there on plain language, that's something I want, but there may be things that people say, hey, we have a UDL initiative, could you put it on your page? Or, hey, this would be a really key resource, could you, think about adding it or whatever. So we don't update all the time with UDL on campus, but we do keep a record of everything, and then when we update, we try and address things.
Yeah, and I'm just going to reiterate what has been in the chat window. We will, all of the resources here are available already online. The actual webinar recording, we will get that cut and posted to the website within the next week. And I will also update the resources handout after this with any of the additional resources that were posted into the chat window, so you'll have that available as well.
And I just want to respond to Susan's question. So Susan's question is asking about, are there any universities that have looked at the first-year experience through the lens of UDL? So I would say I do know of the CollegeSTAR initiative, has two sides to it, but one thing they actually do, and they do this specifically for students that come in with learning differences, is they actually do in-reach into the high school system. They actually reach into the smaller subset of their initiative, but students in the high school experience, and then help them through the transition into higher ed and provide support, and they've actually collected data on how those students have done. Now, these are students who would have had IEPs, individualized education plans, in high school. So that's one thing. But then also their work, and I think Cal State's work when they had Project Enact, did address not just the first year experience, but sort of those high enrollment, low pass courses. So those are often STEM courses. But that's the way they're actually looking at the first year experience. And I know the CollegeSTAR tutoring initiative is one that probably could be replicated, so it's worth maybe starting, Susan, and looking at what is there. And they also have their own website, which is also just collegestar.org.
The other thing I wanted to say is that on the UDL on-campus website, there is a whole section on UDL initiatives where we list all of the universities and post-secondary institutions that actually have projects in process. So you could take a look there, and if you either have a relationship with one of those universities or post-secondary institutions, you could connect with them directly, or feel free to contact us, and we would be happy to put you in touch with those folks as well. As well as on the AEM Center, we actually have a person who works at Boston College, and so if you are interested in their UDL initiative, which has been going on for several years, and they're doing an excellent job there around accessibility and implementing UDL in their course design, I know that he would be also happy to help you and have a conversation with you about that as well. So I'm just reading in the chat window. I'm going to let you read the question in the chat window, Sam. I'm just going to take a look through and see what else is here.
Okay, just to make sure I can get it all.
Oh, can you read that? Sorry. Sam is trying to read what's in the chat window, so give us 1 second here and see if we can respond to this.
That's a good one. Cynthia, were you going to pipe up and ask some of the stuff around quality, critical components of quality indicators of AIM, maybe?
Sure. And I also wanted to, am I good to go?
You're good. Yeah.
Okay,
you just might need to talk a little louder.
Okay. Thank you. I also wanted to respond to Danny's question regarding students 22 years old, so it could be a son,
yeah,
or a daughter. So I'm a former disability services provider at a private university, and I'm happy to talk with you offline, Danny, which might be, because it is a little bit complicated. There are a number of steps that you can take, and there are some resources to support parents and students when they're transitioning into post-secondary and they need accommodations. Dyslexia is, as you know, and your child has experienced, can be a complicated accommodation because of the possibilities of what may be helpful to the student, as well as the types of documentation that an institution may be looking for. So I would be happy to follow up with you, and I'll put my email address in the chat pod so that we can talk offline. Good question. And anybody else who wants to be, we could probably do a webinar on dyslexia in AIM and UDL. So thank you for bringing that up. And I think Sam asked about the quality indicators, and that just refers to some components for looking at best practices for implementing AIM. We have them for post-secondary, and I think we'll also likely do a webinar in the near future on those. Thank you.
Great. So I'm cognizant of the time. We have 3 minutes left here, and so I am going to wrap this up. If there are questions, we'll look through the chat again. If there are specific questions, we could possibly answer them and put them in the resource guide. So do feel free to continue to ask a few questions as we're going through our last couple of slides here. First, I do want to acknowledge Brooke, our captioner today. Brooke, you were amazing. So thank you so much for providing that accommodation for us today. It's always incredibly helpful. Yes, Brooke is awesome. So we're so thankful for that. And Cynthia, do you want to just mention our next, no, that's perfect. Mention our next webinar coming up?
Sure. So our next AIM webinar is going to be delivered by Beth Koss, and some of you may know her because she's well known in the area of assistive technology. She works specifically with early learning. I know you're all post-secondary, but I imagine we have some faculty who teach pre-K and elementary education. So she's going to be giving a webinar related to teaching the swipe generation, is what she's called it. It's going to be around apps that support literacy development and math development for early learners, and that's on February 8th. It's a different time for the AIM Center webinars. Typically we go 2 to 3. This one is 3 to 4, so please note that. And I think registration is already open for that, right, Leslie? So you can sign up anytime. Looking forward to seeing many of you at that webinar as well.
Great. So as we finish up here, I do want to thank you all for joining us today. This has been a great experience for us here. We are going to, when we end the webinar today, we're going to prompt you with a survey. If for some reason you need to leave, the link to the survey is in the handout, the resource materials, so please do fill out the survey. We really do appreciate your feedback. And again, if there's interesting topics that you'd like for future webinars, we would love to hear that and get that feedback in that survey. So thank you again. Sam, any final words?
No, thanks for participating, and thank you all for the work you do every day to make higher education work better for all students.
And thank you to Leslie, who's our silent partner, but who we wouldn't be able to make this happen without. So thank you so much, Leslie. Great job. So we're gonna sign off here. And Leslie, do I have to end the recording first before I send out? You will. Okay, Leslie's going to end that and end the recording, and then we're going to close out this, and you will get automatically booted into the survey. So again, thank you so much for your time today.